for our purposes, and most important of all, he is the author of 2 books. So he's a writer, he's a thinker, and he is a sophisticated traveler. One of the things that we know about Luke, and again this makes him very useful for us understanding the message of Jesus, is that Luke has many things in his book that other people don't have, that Mark, Matthew, and John do not have. One thing in Luke's book that's very important and is a very accurate reflection of this new community, this new movement, was that Luke writes a lot about women. He writes more about women than the other 3. He tells stories that no one else told. So, for instance, he gives you the story of the prophetess Anna in the 2nd chapter. He gives the story of the widow of Nain in the 7th chapter. He gives the story of the sinful woman in the 7th chapter. He gives the story of the ministering woman in the 8th. Martha and Mary, the whole story of Martha and Mary, and its very revealing encounter between Martha, Mary, and Jesus in their house and the visit, and other stories, the daughters of Jerusalem in chapter 23. Many, many stories about women and women's participation in Jesus' life. Why is this so important? Well, because one of the most important things that was going to be true of Christianity in this 1st century and after was the important role of women. The emphasis on women's roles, the emphasis on the importance of women, the emphasis on the equality of women, that is, that they were as important as the men in the community around Jesus. In fact, there were many women who were with him all the time through the whole story and are there at the end and receiving the very important revelation at the end. So Christianity was changing the very society in which it ministered. It was changing the society and its attitude to 1/2 of the human race. It was completely reversing the Greek attitudes to women. The Greek culture had been most definitely a culture of men. It had been built by that old patriarchal world of the Bronze Age charioteers. There was no place for women in any kind of role, very important role. And so this story, coming out of ancient Israel, out of Israel and Rome, Roman Israel, was going to produce an idea of women that was completely opposite to the role of women in Greece. Now, we've been saying here that one of the great pillars of Western civilization is the Greek civilization, and now we're turning to this other one. And what you realize is, now here you have in the later heritage, in the years, say, 5 or 6 or 700 AD, one from Greece and a different one from the Judeo-Christian tradition in their approach to women. And this writer Luke, in his book, will give you stories and values and information and ideas about Jesus and what he did about women that will be something that no one has ever seen before in any culture. Not Roman, not Greek, not ancient Israel either. Here in this 1st century AD, this group will be including women in their lives the way nobody ever has before. Number 2, attitudes to the sick. Now, Luke is a doctor, so he is going to be probably the most scientific about illness of all the writers. But he also speaks for an attitude towards the sick that Jesus is going to encourage, and that is compassion. Help, kindness, generosity, care for the sick. Now, this was definitely not what was often the attitude of the ancient world. In the ancient world, often someone who was sick because they were bad, and therefore we shouldn't get close to them, we shouldn't touch them, we shouldn't have anything to do with them if possible, because they were sick for a very good reason, and therefore get away from them. So lepers were literally cast out into the streets, and the ancient civilizations were full of lepers who were all by themselves out in the wild country. And the Christians, and Luke is reporting on this, the Christians reverse this and say, no, these people who are sick are our care. We need to, as human beings, reach out and embrace and take care of one other human being who is sick, because they are a member of the human race. The dignity of the human race is such that we are called to take care of them, not cast them out. Now, this was a radical, dramatic new idea that you should be even better to people who are sick than to those who are healthy. And as a doctor, and as someone who's traveling with Paul and who is meeting people who are ill and coming to Paul with their stories, Luke, more than anybody else, records these stories. The widow of Nain and their son, chapter 7, the crippled woman in the synagogue in chapter 13, the man with dropsy in 14, the lepers in 17, and I could go on and on and on. In Acts there are many stories of healing or of caring, with or without healing. Still, showing consideration, kindness, care is going to be one of the centerpieces of Christianity, and this writer Luke, cares about it. Number 3, again, another group that Luke talks about more than anyone else, and talks about them in a special way, and that is the poor. So we have 3 groups here: women, sick, poor, all of whom are called in his story, are called upon us to take special care, that we reach out. And so the poor are not to be rejected and thrown out. They're not something that is ridiculous or to be laughed at, but in fact, in their state of poverty, we who have more should reach out and help them. We have more, so we should share what we have. And many of the early saints are remembered because of some act of sharing. You all know St. Martin of Tours. That's the great story. St. Martin of Tours cuts his cape in half and gives it to the poor cold man on the side of the road. Good Samaritan. So here is Luke then talking to us about 3 groups who will be important in their community, because their community will intentionally set up communal structures, charitable groups, ways to help the sick and the poor. And in the growth of their community, this will be one of the most important reasons that people join their community. This is going to be one of the most important reasons, is that others see them taking great care of the sick and the poor, and they are attracted by that because they think that these people have some insight about how human beings should live that nobody else has shown them before. So that's Luke the writer. That's what he cares about. If we just go on with the next chapter, you can see, here's the story. In the days of King Herod of Judea, there lived a priest called Zechariah, who belonged to the Abijah section of the priesthood, and he had a wife, Elizabeth, who was the son of Aaron. Here he tells the story of the lineage of Jesus, of his family, of Mary and Joseph, and the Annunciation, and the visitation, and then in the next pages he will go on. These beautiful pictures that you're looking at are in the chapel at Padua, the same city where part of Luke is, Padua. And in fact, Santa Giustina is just around the corner from where this beautiful church is. This is a chapel that was paid for by a wealthy Paduan banker, paid for the whole thing, all the painting, and Giotto painted it. He was from Florence. He did all of this in about the year 1300, 1305, came to Padua, painted this whole cycle on the walls. They're beautiful paintings, and it's a nice way to talk about the stories that Luke is telling. Of course, Giotto, to paint these paintings, is reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He's taking all of his information from them. Before we start, let me just respond to some of the questions. A lot of people asked, what was a Gentile? I put up there that Luke was a Gentile. That just means he was a non-Jew. So a Gentile in that moment is not a Jew. Therefore, that can be someone in Greece, that can be someone in Rome, in Italy, that can be someone in France, in Gaul. All those people are not Jews, and they may be worshiping Roman gods in whatever city they live in, the same gods that are being worshipped in the Forum in Rome. So it's just a term meaning non-Jew. Remember, in the beginning, these events are being witnessed by a few hundred people, and then a few thousand. So slowly, the circle of people who are hearing about all of this is growing, first growing beyond Jerusalem into the rest of Israel, then exceeding the limits of Israel into neighboring Syria, and that would be the city of Antioch. Antioch was the city of Luke. And so he would have heard the stories, he would have met some of the people, maybe met Paul, and decides to find out more. And at that point, Christianity as a community, as a group, had to start to be clear as to who could join their club, right? What religion would Luke or these other people who were joining it, what would they have been practicing before? Well, they're practicing or living with or maybe being present for various celebrations to the Roman gods that are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. When the Romans came into a particular province and settled it, conquered it, took over the capital, built Roman temples, built Roman buildings, they would set up a Roman priesthood. They would set up the same kind of priesthood that exists in Rome, and would begin to celebrate and have the various celebrations just exactly like they were having in Rome. So, in other words, the religious world that a Luke would be experiencing in Antioch would be exactly the same as the one in Rome that's taking place in the Forum, within which someone like Julius Caesar is a priest at one point. Julius Caesar is the Pontifex Maximus, the highest priest at a point in his career. So that the Roman state at this moment makes no separation between the religious part of its community and its history and the political or the military. So Julius Caesar can be a number one general, he can be a number one politician, the president of the country, and he can be a number one pope. He can be the Pontifex Maximus. That's where the word pope comes from. He can be the number one priest. He can be all those things in Rome, because for them, all of these fields all go together, because it's all Rome, you see. That it's Rome that matters. So all these things go together, and it's all Rome.